Welcome back, friends, with another lecture in lecture series in lipids. Today we will discuss an important types of lipids which is known as fatty acids. So let's start today's lecture. First of all, we will discuss about some important properties of fatty acids. So what are fatty acids? Fatty acids are carboxylic acids which contain unbranched hydrocarbon chains of approximately 4 to 24 carbon atoms. So fatty acids are carboxylic acid which contains unbranched hydrocarbon chains of carbon atom. You can see here in this figure, this is a typical example of fatty acid. It contains carboxylic acid group. This is carboxylic group, and this is a long chain of hydrocarbon chain which is unbranched. So this is a typical example of fatty acids. Next one is fatty acids are the simplest form of lipids, and the COOH group or carboxylic group gives fatty acid an acidic property. So fatty acid property is acidic due to the presence of COOH group which is known as carboxylic group. Also, fatty acids are present as fats components and membrane lipids, esterifieds with alcohols such as glycerol, sphingosine, or cholesterol. It means that fatty acids are present as fats components and also components of membrane lipids, and these in membrane lipids these are esterifieds with various types of alcohols such as glycerol, sphingosine, or cholesterol. Also, fatty acids occurs in small amounts as unesterified form known as free fatty acid with amphipathic properties, and they are usually bound to proteins. So fatty acids also occur in unesterified form, and these are known as free fatty acid with amphipathic properties. Which amphipathic properties are those properties, and the amphipathic compounds contains both hydrophobic and hydrophilic properties. So it is known as amphipathic compounds, and they are usually bound to proteins. Also, the number of carbon atoms in the longer natural fatty acid is always even because they are biosynthesized from the C2 building blocks. As we know that the building block of the natural fatty acid is C2 building block. So these longer natural fatty acids are always the carbon numbers, yeah, the carbon number of carbon atoms are in even number. Next important concept is the saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. So what is saturated and unsaturated fatty acids? Saturated fatty acids are those fatty acids which lacks double bond, while unsaturated fatty acids contain one or more double bonds. Both saturated and unsaturated fatty acid almost equally occur in the natural lipids. So these two both are almost equally occur in natural lipids. Also, fatty acid with one double bond are known as monounsaturated fatty acid, and those with two or more double bond are known as polyunsaturated fatty acid known as POFA. You can see here in this these figures, this is the example of saturated fatty acid, and you can see here this is the carboxylic group, and this is the you can see here in this figure they lack a double bond. No double bond is present between the carbon bonds, and these two are the examples of unsaturated fatty acid. In this figure, this compound contain one double bond. You can see here this is one double bond. So it is monounsaturated fatty acid. In this example, you can see here they contain two double bond. This is one double bond. This is another double bond. So it is a polyunsaturated fatty acids because it contains more than two double bond. So it is all about saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. Next one is the double bond occur in unsaturated fatty acid may be cis or trans configuration. So what is cis and trans configuration? When the hydrogen groups are on the same side of the double bond and fold into a U-like formation occurs, which these occurs naturally are known as cis configuration. And if the hydrogen groups occur on the opposite side, it is called as trans configuration. You can see here in these figures, you can see this is one fatty acid, this is another fatty acid. So you can see here, this is the cis configuration because both the hydrogen groups are present on the same side. And you can see here it form a U shape. So this is cis configuration, and this fatty acid you can see this is one hydrogen group, this is another. So these two are present on the opposite side, so it is trans configuration. Nomenclature of fatty acid. Fatty acid naming, the systemic name is based on the hydrocarbon from which it is derived. And the saturated fatty acid end with a suffix enoic, while the unsaturated fatty acid end with a suffix enoic. Fatty acid are also widely used as a common name. The common names are also widely used, but the nomenclature is based on the systematic name. So you can see here in this figure, this is naming saturated fatty acid, this is naming unsaturated fatty acid. We already discussed that the saturated fatty acid end with enoic acid. You can see here, these are the systematic name, the common name. So it is based on the systematic name. So you can see here N butanoic. So it end with enoic, suffix enoic. All you can see, all these example end with enoic. So this is the nomenclature of saturated fatty acid. And you can see here the naming of unsaturated fatty acid. This is the common name and this is the systemic name. So you can see here we discussed that it ends with enoic, suffix enoic. So you can see all these examples, it will end in enoic acid, enoic acid. So these are the nomenclature of fatty acid based on the systematic name of fatty acids. Next one is the numbering of carbon atoms in fatty acids. Start from the carboxylic carbon, which is taken as number 1 carbon with adjacent are carbon number 2, 3, and 4, and so on. All alternately, it is called as alpha, beta, and gamma, and so on. So the numbering of carbon in fatty acids start from the carboxylic group, and the carboxylic carbon is taken as carbon number 1, and with adjacent carbon is carbon 2, 3, and so on. The terminal carbon when methyl group is known as omega carbon, and from this end the carbon atoms are numbered as omega 1, omega 2, and omega 3, etc. Also, some conventions such as delta is used to show double bond the numbers and position. So delta is used to show the number and position of double bond. So you can see here, this is the numbering of carbon atom in a fatty acid. So this is the carboxylic side, and this is the terminal side containing methyl group. So normally the carbon numbering start from the carboxylic side. So this carbon is carbon number 1, this is carbon number 2, this is carbon 3, this is carbon 4, this is 5, 6, and so on. It is alternatively also named as alpha, beta, gamma, etc. Also the numbering from the terminal side, which contain a methyl group, the carbon numbering is known as omega. So this carbon is omega 1, this is omega 2, this is omega 3, and so on. Also, some convention like delta is used for the number and position of double bond. Depending on the length of carbon chains, fatty acid has three groups. Number one is short chain, which contain less than 6 carbon. Second one is medium chain, which contain 8 to 14 carbons, and long chain, which contain 16 to 24 carbons. So these are the three classes based on the number of carbon chains. Next one is the shorthand representation of fatty acid, that how we can represent fatty acid in a short manner instead of its long name. So some short notations, which is denoted by numbers, is used to represent fatty acid instead of its full name. So first, the total number of carbon atoms are written, followed by the number of double bonds. Also, notation like delta is used for the number and position of double bond. For example, a 20 carbon fatty acid with one double bond between C9 and C10 and another between C12 and C13 is designated as 20:2 and to delta 9 and 12. So it means 20 means the fatty acid contain 20 carbon, and to 2 means it contain 2 double bond, which is present between carbon 9 and 10 and 12 and 13. Delta 9:12 means that it contains 2 double bond, one carbon 9 and another at carbon 12. So this is the short representation of fatty acid, and it is used instead of using its long name. Next one is the polyunsaturated fatty acid. It is identified by the position of double bond nearest the methyl end, the CH3 end, carbon chain called as the omega number. So the polyunsaturated fatty acid is named at the methyl end carbon chain. So if polyunsaturated fatty acid has first double bond 3 carbon away from the methyl end, it is called as omega 3 fatty acid. If 6 carbon away, it is known as omega 6 fatty acid. If 9 carbon away, it is known as omega 9, and so on. So we already discussed it that from the carboxylic acid side, the carbon numbering is denoted by 1, 2, 3, and from the methyl side, it is denoted by omega 1, omega 2, omega 3, but in polyunsaturated fatty acid, it is denoted from the methyl carbon chain end. So if it contains if this is carbon 3 and it contains a double bond, so it is known as omega 3. If it contains a double bond at 6 carbon, so it is known as omega 6. If it contains a double bond at carbon 9, it is known as omega 9 and omega 12, and so on. Next one is the physical and physiological properties of fatty acids. These are very important. First one is the melting points of even number carbon fatty acid increase with chain length and decrease according to the unsaturation. So the melting point of even number carbon fatty acid increase with chain length. As the chain length increases, the melting point increases, and it decreases according to the unsaturation. So if the double bond is formed, so the melting point decreases. Unsaturation means it added double bond into the chain of fatty acid. Next one is a triacyl glycerol containing 3 saturated fatty acid of 12 carbon or more is solid at body temperature. So triacylglycerol contain three saturated fatty acid which is of 12 carbon or more. It will be solid at body temperature, so it will be solid. Whereas if the fatty acid residues are 18 into 2, it is liquid to below 0, so it will be liquid. So if the fatty acid residue contain 18 carbon and 2 double bond, so it will be liquid also below 0 temperature. Next one is the membrane lipids, which must be fluid in all environmental temperatures, are more unsaturated than storage lipids. So the membrane lipid, which need to be fluid in all environment temperature, it contain more double bonds, because unsaturated mean it contains more double bond than the storage lipid. The storage lipids are more saturated. Also, the last one is lipids and tissues that are subject to cooling. For example, in different hibernators organisms like bears, they are more unsaturated, which means that they contains more double bonds. So these are some important properties of fatty acids. So it is all about fatty acids. Thank you for joining.